All right, gentlemen. Playoff picks. Gonzo, you are up first. We're going to go through picking the 4-team college football playoff for the 2023 season. Gonzo, who is going to make the playoff, and fill out your bracket as you go.
Oh man, this is like I've said in prior segments, this is going to be another portion that ruffles some feathers. So I have it in this order. So I have number one, I have Georgia. That's my SEC champion.
Oh,
A
shocker.
number shocker, right? The team that won two natties in a row and it's just been unstoppable as the number one overall seed. Then second, I've got Clemson. I think they refigure it out, even at a potential 12-1. That's factoring in the conference championship. 12-1, you lost to Florida State once. I don't think anybody else clips them in the ACC. I could see them being rewarded more so for beating Florida State. In 3, it's going to look like a homer pick, so I do apologize, but I do have LSU because how I see that, it's got to play out this way, basically. Basically, the Tigers would have to go undefeated and then lose to Georgia in the SEC championship.
If they do that, they're in. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
because the committee does not do rematches, the number 4 team will be Ohio State, who probably should be the 3 seed, but because the committee doesn't like to do rematches, Ohio State will be the 4 seed, and that's going off of an earlier take I have of them winning the conference. It hurt me to it not hurt me. It was hard because like Michigan is good, but I have the Buckeyes returning and setting up another rematch.
This makes sense with the seeding and everything based on who you pick to win the conference. It does make sense.
Yes, and I'm big on continuity. I am not I don't like to throw out kind of like, I made that caveat with Washington. Even though I took their under, I kind of corrected and said, even though I took an under, I still think they can win the conference. So now in 1v4, honestly, who knows if Marvin Harrison actually plays this game from an NFL perspective, which I wouldn't fault him. But I think Georgia again gets Ohio State and wins. I don't know if it's going to be a missed field goal as the ball drops, but if it's anything like that, thank you is all I'll say.
If this plays out like you're saying, man, Ohio State fans got to be like just torturing themselves on the deathbeds.
And then this hurts. And I don't have a good reason to think it. It might be the skeptic in me, but I have Clemson over LSU. I can't give you a definitive reason why. I mean, because Jaden Daniels, you would think would be playing really well at that point, but maybe Clemson with Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik, maybe the offense is just clicking. And Clemson has, even though LSU beat them in the Natty for the Natty in 19, Clemson has beaten LSU in prior matchups, and I could just maybe see that as one where you get off the high of playing Georgia, even if you lose, and then maybe just the bounce back isn't there, which would kill me. But and then I think in a Georgia Clemson rematch, I think Georgia wins that game. I think it's a gritty like 21-17 kind of game where they stymie Cade Klubnik and Vandegrift just enough to win. I'm assuming Vandegrift would be the starter. So I have Georgia win the national championship. Hot take, I know, but I really do think they'll three-peat just given how light their schedule is, and can you turn it on for 3 games?
Very true. I will say this, Clemson going to the national championship, I do personally feel like that's kind of bold, but I could totally see that happening. So you're definitely on the higher end of Clemson.
It is hard to take them over LSU. It really is, but
that would be a story, man. That would definitely mean that Cade Klubnik like takes that step forward, and Garrett Riley is truly like a gem, a rock star.
If they did that, Garrett Riley would be a head coach the very next cycle.
Without a doubt.
So for who I have just missing, for me it was Florida State and Penn State. I know Michigan is just going to come chirping at me, and maybe that's warranted. For me, it would be FSU. Their only stumbling block is either LSU or Clemson, and they finish, just outside because they lose in the ACC championship. Maybe that would have been what decided who goes to the championship. And then Penn State, I'm kind of hoping for a Big Ten where Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan all beat each other. And because of how that works out, Penn State ends up being the one on the outside looking in because they lost at the wrong time. But really, you could substitute Penn State for Michigan, but I'm giving Penn State some love since we all picked against them. So that's my just missed. I think the thing I'm most confident in any of this is Georgia winning a national championship. That is what I would go to the bank right now, take money from the bank, and put money on in my playoff.
Gonzo's got that dogs three-peating, and then Clemson, what would be, hey, I'll tell you what, all that Dabo Swinney criticism we've been dealing with the last 2 years, that would shut up pretty quickly if Clemson made it to the Natty this year. So put it that way.
Banking on Klubnik.
All right, San. What do we got?
1. I wonder if it's a shocker of who number 1 is in this. It's Georgia. Oh my God. Who would have thought? Oh man. I do wish I could have changed my seating a little bit because of the logic that Gonzo mentioned in his table. But I do have Michigan at 2 and Ohio State at 3. And this is why I wish I could change my seating a little bit, because typically they like to avoid those rematches. I think that makes perfect sense, Gonzo. So Ohio State should be in the 4. But regardless, we'll keep it as it is. I'm going to say USC, Pac-12 champion, gets that 4 spot. And that's just the Caleb Williams factor, guys. And that's the only reason I'm putting USC in the conversation here. I think without Caleb Williams, USC is a terrible team. Not terrible, but like 7-8 wins. Mm-hmm. I really think Caleb Williams is that big of a factor for USC. With that being said, it's not enough to beat Georgia. Georgia beats them. Michigan, Ohio State, that's a tough one to pick. But I'm going to say in the rematch at a neutral site, Ohio State takes it. Ohio State's going to the championship game. And then we have Georgia, Ohio State, which was a hell of a game last year. And Ohio State can match up really well with Georgia. But again, I think Georgia's going to edge them out. And Ohio State fans are going to hate Georgia for all eternity.
All right, so both of you guys have Georgia beating Ohio State in the playoff at some point again, which would be, man, that would suck if you're an Ohio State fan. That's interesting. So Gonzo, I noticed you didn't have a Pac-12 team. Zan, so you think the Pac-12 is going to get into the playoff, and then you have Michigan, Ohio State getting in again. So that means no ACC, no Big 12 team.
So here's the rationale. So Michigan, Ohio State, cakewalk schedules outside of each other in Penn State. So they're probably both going to have 1 loss or no losses. So they're not going to get penalized. Big brands never get penalized for that stuff. They're going to both be in, unless we have like an undefeated Clemson or like a 1-loss Clemson or a 1-loss FSU, which I don't think is in the cards for either one of them. I think they're both going to lose a couple of games, especially after conference championship week by then. And then with the Pac-12, I think all those teams, I think the top 2 teams to come out of the league will have 2 losses, but I think there's going to be a strength of schedule argument that's going to be in play for them, because the top of that league is really, really good. And I think that's going to be able to squeak them into the 4 spot. And then, of course, when we talk about my just missed here, my just missed is LSU and Washington. And that's basically your people who lost the championship games. So they're playing, those championship games are playoff games.
So you basically are assuming that the Big 12 and the ACC are pretty much going to beat up on each other a lot here.
Yeah, I think the Big 12 will knock each other out. I think a wild card here is Texas to get in, but are we really going to – I already put my faith in Texas picking them to win. I'm not going to have them ruin my bracket here too in case they completely – because, I mean, it's Texas.
Smart,
Their history is we can have the best team and still not win anything. And yeah, so because of that, I'm not going to do that. I think Texas would have the best chance of making the playoffs of any team out of the Big 12 this season. Otherwise, everyone else is going to beat each other. ACC, Clemson, or FSU are your teams. I think FSU is going to lose maybe 2 games in the regular season, which is going to be more than enough to keep them out, I think, especially if you have 1 loss, Michigan, Ohio State. And then if you have a 2-loss Pac-12 team who played a significantly harder schedule, I think you can argue, because, I mean, I'm not mistaken, USC also plays Notre Dame. So you can you also have that strength of schedule argument that can catapult you over them. I don't know, man. I really think SC or a Pac-12 team will get in over.
Hey, they were a win away last year. I mean, they were a win over Utah away from, I mean, that might have won me the team. That could have won me the team draft potentially, or I forget what was at stake there, but no, like they were
correct about that.
If you would expand my just misses, I mean, FSU, Clemson, that'd be like right after LSU in Washington.
Yeah, so this would be for USC. This would be the semifinal that you wanted to have last year, because if USC had won the Pac-12, this is what the playoff would have looked like last year if USC had beaten Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. This is exactly what it would have looked like. So So USC, you'll get that semifinal rematch against Georgia that you really wanted. All right. Well, I will wrap us up here. So my number one team, it is Georgia. No, it's LSU.
Oh my
goodness. It's LSU. So for those of you who haven't watched our conference championship prediction video, this is going to seem like a big hot take here, but if you watched that video, you would have seen that I have LSU winning the SEC over Georgia. I already laid out my reasoning for that in that video, so you can go ahead and watch that if you want to hear, but I think LSU has that upside. Now, this doesn't mean that I think LSU will be the most talented team on paper in the country, but if LSU is able to do what I think they will do and beat Georgia in the SEC title game, they will have by and far probably the best resume of any team in the country, even with a loss, because I think LSU for sure will have a loss. But I think this is a season where I could see there not being any undefeated teams by the end of the regular season. I could see that being this type of year. So I think LSU has that pathway to number one. I really do. Now, number two, a little more grounded here, Michigan. You guys know how I feel about Michigan. I think they are the best team in the Big Ten, and I would be surprised if they are not in playoff consideration at all by the end of the year. I think this team will be better than it was last year, and I think legitimately they are a little bit better than Ohio State and Penn State. I think they'll get to number two because they do have an easy schedule outside of those two games. And then for number three, give me UGA. I had to throw them in here somewhere. So here's my logic behind this. So, of course, I have LSU beating UGA in the SEC championship game, which I know is a little flamey there. But I think Georgia will be undefeated going into that game because, I mean, you guys seen Georgia's schedule, right? So Georgia losing to LSU in the SEC title game, they probably won't have a lot of good wins on their resume. But, I mean, come on. I think we know what's going to happen if Georgia loses a close game in the SEC title games 12-1. They're going to get the benefit of the doubt. And like I said, I think a lot of teams are going to have at least one loss this year at the top of the sport. So I think Georgia's going to find their way in one way or another. At number four, Washington. I'm kind of following Zan's logic here. I think the Pac-12, when you have so many good teams at the top, even though they probably are going to beat up on each other a little bit, I think I would be very surprised if any Pac-12 team finishes undefeated. But a Pac-12 team with one loss is going to have a good resume. A Pac-12 champion with one loss is going to have a good resume. And yeah, even a Pac-12 team with two losses, I think you can make an argument. I think Washington will be that team. And I think this is the year, which would be extremely ironic because the league is basically dissipating after this year. But this will be the year that the Pac-12 gets a team into the playoff in the final iteration of this 4-team playoff. So LSU versus Washington. Man, that would be something if this was a semifinal game. But I got to go with LSU beating Washington. I think Washington, this is where, you know, your upside potential, it gets capped off here in the playoff. I mean, we all know how it goes. When you have teams that don't recruit inside the top 10 or 15, this is kind of where you hit your ceiling, is in the playoff. And then you have Michigan versus Georgia. Oh, boy. Wait till you guys see this.
Oh, my gosh.
Listen, guys.
Crack is bad.
I said on the other video, the only thing that's stopping Georgia from three-peating is itself. And I think history is on my side. It is extremely hard to win 3 back-to-back-to-back national championships. I mean, everyone thinks Georgia is this like unstoppable wagon, in which they are. But let's keep in mind here. You guys remember 2021, that team lost to Bama in the SEC title game. That team was, you know, let's say if we don't have those injuries to Alabama in the 2021 national championship game, you could make a case Georgia could have lost if not for those injuries. And then we go back to 2022 last year. I mean, guys, Ohio State, if that field goal went in, Ohio State would have beat Georgia. Like, it's not like Georgia was far and away like, oh yeah, they won the national championship and just demolished everyone in their path.
Shoob, I think there is a good litmus test just from last year alone. Both Michigan and Georgia have a common opponent.
Exactly.
How'd that turn out?
Exactly. And, you know, I think Michigan legitimately has the upside to pull this off. And I know this is extremely bold of me, but, you know, I got to spice it up here.
It is bold, but hey, if it's right, though.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hey, listen, I think Georgia's the best team in college football going into this year. Do I think the best team in college football is going to win the national championship? No, because that's not how it works. Sometimes the best team doesn't end up winning the national championship. So, yeah, I had to add a little spice, guys. We couldn't just all have Georgia three-peating here. I got to add some spice to the pod. I think LSU versus Michigan in the Natty. I think this would be great for college football. It would feel like kind of like that 2019 sort of year, that type of refreshing feeling. And who do I have winning the national championship? Gonzo, you're going to love me here.
Stop it. Oh, my gosh.
I think the possibility is there. I really think the possibility is there. I think the upside is there. Again, I didn't go to LSU. I'm not an LSU fan, but I really am high on this team. I'm very high on this team relative to the markets. And I think that this is very well within possibility of happening, especially if LSU were to draw Washington as their semifinal game. Keep in mind here, if LSU draws like Georgia again in a rematch, yeah, I don't know if I would like LSU beating Georgia twice. There's no way they beat them twice. But if you draw Washington, I like your odds to get to the Natty. And if you draw Michigan, I also like your odds in that game. Give me LSU as national champions. Guys, I had to spice it up here. Said it 3 times already, but it had to be done.
Some spice down in the gumbo down here in the bayou, man. It's very possible. It's grounded in logic. I mean, this all could very much well happen. So that would be something for sure.
Yeah, I know you'd be pretty happy. I'll tell you that. But
so is this under the assumption that Ohio State loses 2 games?
Yes, this would be under the assumption they lose 1 or 2. I think Ohio State obviously would have had to lose to Michigan in my scenario for Michigan to go on to win the Big Ten championship game. And yeah, I really think Ohio State, there's big question marks on the offensive side of the ball. If I'm wrong about this, it's because Ohio State's defense is just so good. And then, Ohio State's quarterback situation really is solid. They don't turn out to be as big of a question mark as I think it's going to be. And the offensive line too. So that would be the assumption for me, is that Michigan beats Ohio State in the regular season.
So would you think like a 2-loss Washington would get in over a 1-loss Ohio State?
I don't necessarily have that playing out. I have Washington only losing 1 game, but to be honest, I think that could happen just because if Ohio State loses to Michigan, they would have, let's see, a Penn State win. They would have a Notre Dame win, because I know Ohio State's schedule is a little bit tougher than Michigan's this year. I would say probably they would go with Ohio State over a 2-loss Pac-12 team, but I wouldn't close the door on them giving a Washington or a USC the nod, because
especially if they're champ.
Yeah, if the Pac-12 goes as we expect it to go, like the Pac-12 champion is going to have like 3 or 4 top 20 wins on their resume.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the Pac-12 has a little bit shot this year. I think they will beat each other up a little bit, but
they're really good. They're going to hurt each other. Who's on the outside looking in, Shoob?
So just missing, I'm going to have Texas, because, I thought about putting them in here, guys. I know I sound off the chains here to some of you, but
it's not really off the chains, but like you just can't rely on Texas not to choke.
I went with the same logic. I could totally see Texas has the upside to get into this 14 playoff, but because it is Texas, I'm like, all right, I'm not throwing you guys in here. I'm not throwing your Longhorn logo on this 14 playoff, but I'm going to have you just missing. And then the other team I have is Florida State. And I think this is more so I think Florida State being in the ACC, if they have that 1 win over Clemson, they would have, in my scenario, obviously a close loss to LSU. That wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. And then playing in the ACC, they're going to rack up a lot of wins. I could see Florida State being a 12-1 or maybe an 11-2 ACC champion that, is just up there because of their record.
With your just missed list here, that would have to be a 2-loss Ohio State team. Otherwise, I don't think they would be 7th, especially if they had wins against Notre Dame and whatnot. But yeah, no, this is interesting. This is definitely like the Texas thing, I think, is truly possible. And I would actually it'd be really interesting to see if Texas would make it, to see if they could actually put a run together. But I don't think they'll even get there.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, UCLA, USC, you can all substitute those in for Florida State. Like I didn't put too much thought into the just miss, but I think there's like 5 teams I could have listed out there. But for the sake of this, we're only picking 2. But yeah, so that'll do it, guys. That's our 14 playoff predictions. We got 2 Georgias, 1 LSU. So no Oregon, no Penn State. Trying to think of all these other teams that are contenders. Bama? No Bama. Yeah, obviously. No Bama in the playoff. No Bama just missed. None of that. So a lot of these teams that definitely have shots, like we're not picking them. So it'll be very interesting. Hopefully you guys won't give us too much flack in the comments for this, but let us know what you guys think. Let us know your 14 playoff predictions. Do you want to go chalk like Zan and Gonzo and have UGA three-peating, which is probably the most sensible and logical thing to do? Or do you want to go a little off the chains like me and see if there's going to be some spice this year in college football? Let us know what you think in the comments.